Hello and welcome to BrainGeek on Beauty, and Happy New Year. This is my first video of 2021. My name is Jessica and I am a neuroscientist and lover of makeup. So I'm actually really excited to be filming this video today. This is actually one of the first video ideas that I had when I started thinking about making a channel on YouTube. And I'm hoping that it will become a series. Hopefully you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed preparing for it and making it. And this new series is Science and Shadow. So this is essentially like a chatty get ready with me, but instead of doing a full face of makeup while I get ready, I am just going to do eyeshadow. And instead of talking about random shit from my life that you don't care about, I'm going to talk about science. So to prepare for that, I'm going to light my science candle. This is a candle for science. Smells like black magic. Keep your crazy wizardry to yourself. This is from the Whiskey River Soap company. They make amazing, amazing candles. So since we're going to talk about science today, I'm going to light the science candle. All right, and now right behind me here, over in the corner, science is happening. I thought a really good place to start, if I'm going to make this a series, is to talk about what is science. So understanding what science is and how it works is really important for helping us make sense of the science that we see in the media. And particularly in the middle of a pandemic, we are constantly seeing science-related information on our social media and on news platforms. So understanding the scientific process might help us make sense of that information a little bit better, but also to maybe sort of think about how the scientific mindset is applicable to pretty much everything we do in our lives. In future videos, I hope to sort of home in on more specific sort of scientific topics. I have some myths, particularly about the brain, that come up frequently that I hope to dispel. Right brain, left brain, I am coming for you. But anyway, we're going to start off with just what is science generally. And while I do that, I'm going to play with the Nabla Secret palette. So just to show you this here, this is a beautiful palette that contains a number of neutrals, but also some pretty teals and blues and rosy shades and some beautiful duochromes and things like that. I'm going to go in with this shade here, Contigo, a rosy neutral. I thought a really good place to start when discussing what is science is to actually just get a definition of what science is. And so I Googled what is science. So all of the definitions are pretty much the same, but probably one of the sort of most eloquent and I think sort of easiest to understand was the one from the Science Council in the UK. Science is the pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding of the natural and social world following a systematic methodology based on evidence. And then they list sort of the highlights of what scientific methodology entails, which, just to interrupt myself here, this color is really pretty. So scientific methodology includes, as they list here, objective observation, evidence, experiment and or observation, inductive reasoning, repetition, critical analysis, and verification and testing, which includes critical exposure to scrutiny, peer review, and assessment. I could spend an hour unpacking each of those things, and nobody wants to listen to me do that. But I think one of the things that's really critical here is repetition. It is very rare for sort of policy-changing conclusions to be drawn based on a single study that is done. Typically, scientific experiments have to be replicated a number of times under varying conditions, but also that like these experiments go through sort of verification and review. I could similarly do an entire video where I just talk about the peer review process, But the reality is that when we do an experiment, we generally don't get to just publish it whenever we want. It has to go to reviewers who are experts in that field, and they evaluate the evidence that we provide for a particular conclusion that we're drawing. And if they don't think the evidence is strong enough, then you get reviews back that say, nope, not good enough. Here is the additional experimentation that you need to do. Here's an additional analysis that you need to do, whatever the case may be. And then you have to do those things, revise your paper, and resubmit it. So the science that ends up being published is often reviewed multiple times. They'll bring in new reviewers if they review something, or it'll go to a different journal and it'll get reviewed by a different group of experts there. So a lot of people have sort of had their mitts on this stuff by the time that it gets published, in contrast to random stuff posted on the internet. Doesn't mean that what they're saying is wrong, but it isn't going through the same level of scrutiny as a scientific paper. So we will come back to that a little bit later. Suffice it to say, I think one of the reasons why people find science to feel sort of out of the reach of sort of the average person, and why it is so often misrepresented in the media, even by science reporters sometimes. And it's not because it's malicious, it's because science is complicated, it is nuanced, and it is constantly changing. And that makes conveying that information to someone who doesn't have expertise in that area very, very challenging. Now that I've done that, I think I'm going to go in with this darker rosy brown shade there. So, as I was saying, science is complicated. Anyone who's ever taken a class with me has probably at some point heard me say, shit's complicated. When we teach people, particularly like in an introductory class, we teach them facts from textbooks, and these are always heavily simplified. Even when it feels to the student like we're going into a great deal of detail and it's very complicated, it's actually heavily simplified. For every fact that you read in a textbook, there is at least one scientist who has devoted their entire career to studying just that topic. It's always more complicated than we sort of, than the way that we cover it in those introductory classes. So typically, we start off with a sort of introductory broad overview where we say, like, here's a bunch of facts. And then if people go on to further study in that area, we slowly are like, so that's a fact, but we start getting more into the complexities of the topic. So we will say something to students that is true. Like, for example, it is a fact that neurons communicate with other neurons by releasing neurotransmitters. That is a fact. That is true. The reality is that it's way more complicated than that. To understand that process, you actually have to research and understand the functions of ion channels and how ions flow in and out of the cell and the electrochemical cascade that causes neurotransmitters to be released, how all of that affects proteins that are being produced within the cell, how those neurotransmitters not only affect the recipient neuron, but also the neuron that released them, how all those processes are modulated by neighboring glial cells. I could go on, I'll stop there. But the reality is that there's actually a lot of complicated processes that go into that, and you can break down that overall sort of neurons communicate through neurotransmitters into a whole bunch of really complex sub-processes. And there are multitudes of researchers that have focused their entire careers on studying just one tiny aspect of that. So, like, someone can literally spend their entire career studying the structure and function of ion channels on a specific type of neuron, not even all neurons in general. So the reality is that we oversimplify things to start out with, and then the further you go in studying a particular topic, the more you realize how much you don't know. It really is true that when you first start learning about a topic, you feel like you know everything, and the more you learn, the more you realize you know nothing. Because shit's complicated. And when we try to convey sort of scientific results to the general public, we often simplify those stories to the point where it seems like here's a simple fact, here's this thing that happens, and we don't get into the complexities and the nuance of it because it would take decades. My grad students once told me that my catchphrase was, "It depends," because really the answer to pretty much every question is, it depends. The conclusions we come to often have to be very nuanced. Context really matters a lot. So there are things that are true, but they might only be true in a particular circumstance or only when some other condition is being met. And so the conclusions that are drawn often have to be, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but you have to often temper the strength of your conclusions or be very specific about your conclusions and when this is true and when it applies, because of that sort of nuance and complexity. The other thing that I think makes science very frustrating for the average person, but I think is actually a really positive feature of science and the scientific method, is that it's constantly changing. So science is about drawing conclusions based on the best available evidence at that point in time, while simultaneously recognizing that if new evidence becomes available, the conclusion may need to change. It might just be a minor tweak. You might have to amend the conclusion a little. It might turn out that the conclusion was completely wrong and you have to overhaul your entire sort of theory. There's this inherent ability to be wrong built into the scientific method. In fact, if a hypothesis that you have isn't falsifiable, then it's not a scientific hypothesis. Oftentimes when I'm talking to my students, particularly graduate students, I find that they, especially when they're new to sciencing, which yes, I do use as a verb, they often get very anxious about coming to the wrong conclusion. And I think it's because from a very early age, we're sort of taught that there's this unchanging truth, or that there's only one right answer. That is almost never the case, because it depends. I always try to sort of convey to my students that it's okay to be wrong. In fact, it's pretty much guaranteed that at some point you're going to be at least a little bit wrong. And your goal shouldn't be to be right. It should be to be the least wrong you can be, and to draw reasonable conclusions given the current state of affairs. If you conduct an experiment and come to a particular conclusion, if you later perform another experiment and those results require changes or modifications to your original conclusion, that's okay. In fact, that's kind of the point. That's how science is supposed to work. It's supposed to be self-correcting. Nothing stoppers the advancement of knowledge more than people dogmatically holding on to ideas that have been disproven or ignoring evidence that doesn't support their idea. That is antithetical to science. The whole point is that you can be wrong, and as evidence changes, so too should your conclusion. And I think that in particular is kind of an important point that can transfer over into a whole lot of aspects of life. We should be able and willing to change our minds in the light of new evidence. I know I've gone into teacher mode, sorry. I can't help myself. So I'm going to go in with that lovely matte teal shade Addiction on my lid. Oh, that's pretty. I just love that color. I love me a good teal. Okay, so as scientists and just as people, be willing to change our theories, ideas, conclusions in the light of new evidence. That being said, not all evidence is created equal. So one of the sort of tenets of science is that it is based on inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is when you use specific observations to draw more general conclusions. The key to this inductive reasoning is that we evaluate the strength of that conclusion, or to put it another way, how likely is this conclusion to be true? And we could now go into a long discussion of statistics and probability and how scientists go about drawing those conclusions. But because I'm guessing nobody wants to talk about probability, more generally, we evaluate the strength of a conclusion by evaluating how well the observations represent the population of interest. So how representative the sample is, which is something you might have heard in a class at some point. The number or quantity of observations and the quality of those observations. So representativeness, quantity, quality, sort of three basic sort of things. This is what separates science from anecdotes or random opinions people have on the internet. When we evaluate a scientific study and when reviewers do this during the peer review process, these are all things that they're going to be thinking about. And it's, of course, going to, the specifics of that are going to vary based on the field and the techniques that are being used. But in general, that's really what we're looking for. If you are interested in a specific population of people, then the ones that you study need to come from that population. And this is something that psychology in general has gotten a lot of flack for. If you want to make generalizable claims about how a process works in all humans, but then the only subjects in your experiment are undergraduate psychology students between the ages of like 18 and 22 who are like predominantly white and upper middle class, then there is a very good chance that your population isn't representative of the general population. Representativeness is something that that matters, but it depends on the conclusions that you're trying to draw, because it depends. I'm going to go in with fantasize, that's blue, on the outer third, and then in the center of the lid, I'm going to go in with the pinky red color, big experience, and then I think I'm going to do maybe hypersensual here, names, on the inner third, and play hard in the inner corner. Now that I have an eyeshadow plan, how is any of this relevant to beauty, one might ask? Well, it turns out that science is relevant to pretty much everything. A really good example of how all of this is relevant to sort of the beauty industry is with product reviews. Product reviews are essentially a single observation. And when we use product reviews, either on a brand's website or on like Sephora's website, or by watching videos of YouTubers reviewing products, we are essentially performing our own version of science. It's not in a laboratory, but it is inductive reasoning. We are sort of trying to draw a conclusion based on these specific observations. Just as an aside, I now have a whole bunch of blue shit all over my cheeks, so I'm gonna have to clean that up at some point. Had some fallout from that shade. So when we use product reviews to make a decision about whether or not to purchase a product, we are essentially sciencing. We're using a form of inductive reasoning. We evaluate how representative the review is. Now, typically, this is in reference to ourselves rather than the general population. Instead of thinking about, does this sample represent, all of humanity? We're thinking about whether or not the reviewer has commonalities with ourselves. So, for example, if we're reading reviews on foundation, we might take note specifically of things like the reviewer's skin type. So if someone has really dry skin and you have really oily skin, then their evaluation of the product is probably not representative of how you would experience the product. We think about how representative the person writing the review is relative to ourselves, and the features that are likely to influence our experience of the product. Okay. We'll also evaluate like the quantity of the reviews. So if a product only has 2 reviews, and I'm sure we've all been in that situation where we go to look at a product's reviews and there's only 1 or 2 reviews at present. So the fact that a review is really positive or really negative essentially becomes irrelevant. That's just one person's opinion. So when you have that thought in your head, well, that's just one person's opinion, I'm going to wait for there to be more reviews, that's essentially evaluating the strength of an argument or a conclusion based on quantity of observations. Overall, you're not going to take the reviews of a product as seriously if it only has 2 reviews than if it has 500 or 5,000. And then within that, we'll consider like the proportion of positive reviews when we're actually making our decisions. In addition to quantity, we are constantly taking into account the quality of the reviews as well. We'll consider things like whether or not the person reviewing it received the product for free, or at least I know I do. If I'm watching a video review or reading a review and it has the little product received free for testing purposes thing, I'm going to sort of downweight that review, not because the person's being dishonest, but because receiving that product for free is going to change how they evaluate the product. And I could do a whole video on that, and I probably will. You're going to take into consideration whether or not the reviewer might be biased because they received a product for free, or if someone is doing a sponsored post or video, you will sort of take that into account and be like, okay, so let's sort of reweight how important this particular observation is, given that this person might have this bias. Similarly, if all the negative reviews just say, this sucks, and they don't give any information about why, or they don't provide sort of relevant information about representativeness, we're not going to weigh those reviews as heavily. So going back to the foundation example, if there are 10 negative reviews and 90 positive reviews, and all of those negative reviews are from people who had oily skin, and all the positive reviews are from people who say they have normal or combination dry skin, then if you have oily skin, you might upweight the value of those negative reviews because they're representative of you. Those reviews would be of high quality and they'd be representative. But if all of those negative reviews just say, this product sucks, and they don't give any information about why, and they don't provide any information about their sort of representativeness, then you'll probably downweight the value of those reviews because there's no context, basically. When we're trying to decide what to buy, go to Sephora and we're reading all the reviews, say, we mentally combine all of this information about the characteristics of the reviewers and how representative they are of the target population, which in this case is probably you, the number of reviews, the number of positive versus negative reviews, and the quality of those reviews in terms of the sort of quality of the information that they provide, whether or not they're reliable reviews, things like that. And we mentally combine all of that information into an impression of how strong the evidence is for or against a particular product. Now, this process is still fraught with bias, both yours and the reviewers, and we could once again spend a whole lot of time talking about cognitive biases and how they affect decision making. But the point that I really wanted to make is that when you make a decision about what to purchase based on reviews, essentially you're sciencing. I'm going to go in with this dark bronzy shade Romeo on my lower lash line, and then go in with Play Hard on the inner corner. I'll be done with my eye look. Even though obviously reading reviews on the Sephora website when deciding what foundation to purchase is very different than conducting a well-controlled experiment in a laboratory, the sort of idea of using inductive reasoning to sort of draw conclusions and make decisions is a real one. It's something that we all do on a regular basis, not just in terms of purchasing products, but in terms of making all sorts of decisions and drawing all sorts of conclusions in our daily lives. So in its most rudimentary form, perhaps, we're all essentially scientists in a way, even if that's not our career. We are going out and experiencing the world and making observations and then drawing conclusions from those observations. And I think that's probably why, for me, I'm so passionate about education and scientific literacy, because we're essentially all performing scientific reasoning. But if you don't know how to do that well and how to evaluate the evidence that you're presented with, you can come to very, very wrong conclusions. Or you can become that asshole that is unwilling to change their opinion when confronted with evidence to the contrary. Don't be that asshole. How this goes. That is flaky. I feel like this is, if you can see that, this is Play Hard. It's this like flaky iridescent shade, and I feel like I probably need to use this with a glitter glue or a wet brush, but I don't want to go get glitter glue or a wet brush, so we're just gonna put it on and hope for the best. It is very pretty though. Look almost complete. Give me 2 seconds. I will put on mascara and I'll be right back and I'll wrap this up. So here's the final look that I created with the Nabla Secret palette. I am generally pretty happy with it so far. I did get some fallout from the shimmer shades, but nothing crazy, and it was really easy to clean up with just using my sponge. It wasn't a problem. I actually really like the undertones of the neutral shades in here. I did find, I'll take some close-up pictures and post them on Instagram. I do feel like they got a little bit muddy in the crease when I sort of blended a couple of shades together. But overall it looks really good. So I'll definitely have to play around with some of the other shades in it, but formula-wise it's nice. I didn't go into it, but I'm really curious to go in with this black at some point. It looks like it's quite pigmented and nice. So I'll definitely use this again for more looks. But on first impressions, quite happy with it. Just a quick rundown of the other stuff that I already had on my face. So I've talked about these in other videos as well. I used the Uma Beauty foundation and concealer, which are kind of my daily go-tos, as well as the Double Take Sculpt and Strobe stick, the contour end of it. bronzer. It's not really contour, it's bronzer. And the Drama Bomb mascara. I mentioned in a previous video that this had a fragrance to it, and I finally figured out what that fragrance is. It smells like beeswax. So I could, I suppose, look at the ingredient list. Maybe it just has beeswax in it. I'm using MAC Warm Soul Blush because I didn't know what I was going to do with my eye look, so I wanted something pretty and neutral. I also have on my lips one of the MAC Powder Kiss liquid lips. This is Over the Taupe, which I actually really like. I'm finding it to be very comfortable. So I just put a little bit on the center of my lips and then like smudged it out with a finger so that it was sort of a sheerer, smudgier application because I didn't want like a really heavy lip. But I actually am finding it very comfortable and I really like the color. So yay me for having excellent taste. Last but not least, the blush highlighter duo that I picked up from ColoredRaine. This is Prove My Loyalty, and clearly I didn't use this blush, but I did use the highlighter from this today, and I feel very glowy. Anyway, that's what's on my face, and everything will be linked down below. None of them are affiliate links because I'm not affiliated with anyone. I paid for all this shit myself. To wrap this up, this is the first in what I hope will be a series of videos where I talk about science while I do my eyeshadow. I hope that it wasn't too teachery. I do have a tendency to go into teacher mode because I'm a teacher, but I hope that if you already know a lot about science that you weren't incredibly bored, and if you don't know a lot about science that you learned a little something and weren't incredibly bored. If you liked this and you want to see me continue this Science and Shadow series, comment down below, like the video. I do have some other topics planned for future videos that will be more on specific scientific topics that I will tackle and rant about while I do my makeup. But hopefully this was a good start. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope that you enjoyed it and maybe learned a little something as well. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.